What's up, ladies and gentlemen? It's your boy, the cheeky podder himself, Jack Slack. It's Tuesday the 10th of July, and we're coming off a banging weekend of fights. I didn't know it was International Fight Week, that thing that the UFC does every year, which I never actually remember is going on. Basically, it means a shit card on Friday and then a good card on Saturday. And I think one year they did a shit card on Thursday as well, or Wednesday. Do you remember when they used to do like a midweek rubbish fight night from time to time? But a great International Fight Week was had by all, especially by Daniel Cormier and fans of a feel-good ending to a story. The only person who didn't enjoy it was probably Conor McGregor, because he's now not the only simultaneous two-division champion, and Daniel Cormier might actually be simultaneous two-division champion. He could well defend his belts. So we've got tons to talk about in terms of those fights, what just happened. But let's do some news before we go into that. First piece of fun news that jumped out at me was that Bare-Knuckle FC has announced its second card. And these people know their audience, because they've already announced Bec Rawlins back on it, probably fighting another schlub, because everyone was like, oh my god, her hands look so good when she's fighting schlubs. And Crazy Horse Bennett, who, nobody was saying, oh, I desperately need to see Crazy Horse Bennett's boxing, but MMA people will tune in to see Crazy Horse Bennett do stupid shit. So good on Bare-Knuckle FC for that, and I'm sure they'll get another couple of heavyweights like Eric Prindle to beat the shit out of each other. Yeah, if you didn't catch their first event, pretty enjoyable and pretty much what I expected in the run-up to it. I said, if it's actually Bare-Knuckle, you're gonna get a lot of cuts. And if you looked at the list of medical suspensions afterwards, it was all for facial lacerations and broken fingers. Bec Rawlins had broken hands and then told whoever reported the actual announcement from the commission that they were lying. It was amazing. Oh, but if you're in MMA media at all, God, you got your fill of Bec Rawlins when her and her ex-husband were just going back and forth trying to tell people their story about the domestic abuse that did or didn't happen. And you were like, I don't cover this. Why are you giving me your messages about your dirty laundry? But anyway, good for her. Her fight was actually enjoyable last time. The rotating door in the light heavyweight division continues as Corey Anderson is in for Ilir Latifi against Glover Teixeira. You didn't even know that Ilir Latifi was out. You might not have even known that Ilir Latifi was going to be fighting Glover Teixeira. But he's not now. Corey Anderson is instead. Fill your boots with that, whatever that information nets you. Elsewhere in the light heavyweight division, Volkan Ozdemir gets off his assault charges, which is good. The whole thing sounded super sketchy. It was like 4 dudes claiming they were assaulted by one guy. And of course, it's not a good look to have a top-level fighter in ongoing assault dispute. And especially when he can't get his visa to go anywhere else. And then the UFC books him in somewhere outside of the country and then switches him out at the last minute so that he can fight Alexander Gustafsson locally because they advertised him to the German fans, not realising, oh shit, we won't be able to get him there. Or maybe they did know, and they're just sketchy. Who knows? Big news! Kelvin Gastelum versus Robert Whitaker is announced as the next title fight for the middleweight division. Love that fight. Kelvin Gastelum, very much a minimalist, very good with his jab and his left straight. Nice 1-2s, nice feints, and really good at getting up off the floor, much like Robert Whitaker. Robert Whitaker more in the karate boxing mould of things. I'm looking forward to writing about that fight, to be honest. I think if I could make one, that would have been the one I'd make, because I think Gastelum has been beating almost every... Obviously, Weidman beat him, and you do feel bad for Weidman to get that massive win and then say, nah, but he also gets the title shot. But Weidman hasn't really done much else in the meantime. He's been on a terrible slump. So obviously some politics involved, but, Weidman can fight whoever. The ghost of Luke Rockhold. Oh, yeah, actually, isn't he going to light heavyweight? Weidman versus Adesanya, maybe? Oh, now that he's a top 10 fighter, I quite enjoy the idea of that. Yeah, and then the last piece of news is the one that led into the week, which fucked with my schedule, but more importantly, fucked with someone's brain. I can live with putting an article on the back burner and then reusing bits of it if they ever fight again, or if they ever schedule the fight again. But Max Holloway's brain is probably a little bit more important. He's one of the best fighters pound for pound in the world. I think he's right up there, because someone was asking me this about Fedor and Stipe, who's done more. You can see that someone has a lot more skill than, you can see when someone is very skilled, even if they're fighting lower level competition. But equally, there is that Michael Venom Page thing where if you are only fighting lower level competition, we don't know if that level of skill translates to the higher level competition. So I've always been more influenced by who you beat rather than how you beat them, which is why I don't rank Demetrius Johnson tremendously highly on pound for pound, because I can see the guys that he's beaten aren't that great overall as fighters, compared to the title contenders in other divisions, more established divisions with deeper pools of talent. But Max has been beaten everybody in a very busy division, and showed a tremendously rounded skill set while doing it. However, it does worry you that he's willing to point to the center of the cage and let Ricardo Lamas swing at him when he's shut Lamas out for the entire fight. He's a guy who clearly understands the importance of defense, but then will also go, but I will get hit in the head if it makes people cheer. So the whole story was pretty scary. He came in fight week slurring his words and struggling to look at light. And Vegas cleared him, because Vegas will fucking clear anyone. He cleared his medical. And then Michael Bisping's interviewing him on air on whatever that MMA show is that I don't watch, the UFC's state-run TV. And he says, "You sound really tired. Are you all right?" And you sound out of it, mate. And he actually did. I hadn't seen the interviews in the lead up to this, but he sounded drunk. It was terrifying. And his team said that they suspected he had a concussion. He went back to his room after the open workouts and quote-unquote crashed, and they had a hard time waking him up. At that point, you've got to know that shit, the fight's off. But also, more importantly, this dude's brain health might not be in the best place. Obviously, might just be a single concussion, which, as bad as they are expected in combat sports. You will probably get a concussion or two in your life if you compete in combat sports, especially at the highest level. And, brain health is one of those bizarre areas anyway. Just look at Daniel Bryan, was forced out of his wrestling career because he was having seizures. They found out he had a lesion on his brain, and they were like, that's probably something to do with all the concussions you give yourself. So basically, actually, Daniel Bryan's a fascinating story because he was under contract with the WWE for years, and they loved him. Vince McMahon adored him. And he wanted to go off and wrestle on the indies because he knew that WWE would never clear him medically. And WWE didn't want to let him go and wrestle in the indies because they didn't want him to die. Similar to, how WWE wouldn't give Kurt Angle matches towards the end of his WWE run because his neck was destroyed and he was on drugs all the time to deal with the neck pain. Not like Jeff Hardy, just on drugs all the time for fun. But he went to TNA because basically they were like, we don't want you to kill yourself in our ring. But yeah, Daniel Bryan, they literally found a lesion on his brain. Multiple doctors checked it over. And then a few years off, and that's disappeared. They flew him all over the country to see different doctors to get medically cleared. And then he did. So either an amazing cover-up or like a miraculous healing of someone's brain, which would be incredible. So, and there's always been this thing about time off anyway. Manny Pacquiao, after Juan Manuel Marquez turned his lights out with that amazing backstepping right hand or whatever it was, face down knockout, and Freddie Roach insisted that he take a year off, and he came back and he could take a shot as good as ever, and it was never a problem again. Overall, in combat sports generally, you will see this, you get knocked out once, it becomes easier to knock you out again. And the time off thing seemed to help Pacquiao. The problem is we're going on anecdotal stuff because with brain damage and concussion science, you can't get people in a perfect condition and then give them concussions and study that. So you're always dealing with there's a lot of variables at play in any sort of study that anyone does into concussions anyway. I think if you started if you got a load of lab rats and started giving them concussions, I think that you'd have trouble with Greenpeace or PETA or whoever. But anyway, yeah, that's pretty sobering, to be honest. In the aftermath of the announcement, people were like, well, Aldo did hit him with 3 big left hooks, in their 2 fights. People trying to claim a moral victory for Jose Aldo. Oh, well, he hurt him more in the long run. But, yeah, just take better care of yourself. It sounds like either hard sparring too much or getting caught in a hard sparring session and then, too close to the fight. But TJ Grant is our go-to example of a guy whose career, very, very promising career, was cut short by concussions. And I think he ended up working in a mine because it was only announced a few months ago that some major gym had just opened and employed him as their head coach. And that was really good news, in the MMA community. But Grant was on the cusp of a title shot. I mean, if you have Holloway, who's beaten the best featherweight of all time twice back-to-back and has beaten pretty much everyone else in the division, minus Ortega and Edgar, and Chad Mendes, he's coming back. We'll talk about that later, I'm sure. But, that would be like the most high-profile career stopped by brain injury in MMA history, to be honest. Certainly in his prime, I'm not talking about like Gary Goodridge, who was a huge name and fought everyone, but, his career ended because it was like, that's far too much. Max Holloway's still at, like, what is he, 26, 27? He's a young dude. Anyway, I hope that's not the case. I hope Max Holloway gets better. I hope he takes some time off. Who cares if they make an interim title? We all know Max is the best featherweight out there at the moment. Bryan Ortega, while this was all going on, they wanted to fix Ortega up against Edgar or Stevens, and I was a bit like, why would you take that fight if you're Edgar again on short notice when you took the first fight on short notice and lost? Largely because it was a completely different opponent and, someone very dangerous that you hadn't trained very, specifically for. There's always this sort of like excuse-making thing, but I think at the highest levels of the game, and I've always said this, don't take a change of fight. Ever. People demonized John Jones for not taking the replacement fight at UFC 153 or whatever it was, and that was against Chael Sonnen rather than Dan Henderson, who conventionally was thought to be a much less dangerous opponent, but I have never thought that it's a good idea to take a different fight, to take a switch of fighter. You have signed a specific contract to fight one guy. You've done all your prep for one guy. No matter who the replacement is, you have not prepared specifically for them. Which is why it was madness to me when TJ Dillashaw fought Joe Soto on short notice. And Joe Soto had probably the best fight of his career because he wasn't the dude that TJ Dillashaw was expecting to fight. So then they tried to put together Frankie Edgar versus Jeremy Stevens because Bryan Ortega quite rightly and cleverly said, nah, mate, I'll wait for this whole thing to work out. The last thing you want to be doing is worrying about fighting Frankie Edgar, the guy who wants to take you down again, or Jeremy Stevens, the massive knockout puncher, when you were going to be dealing with, crafty striker but not massive one-punch hitter, and not big wrestler, Max Holloway. So they tried to set up Stevens versus Edgar, and that all fell through too. You don't really need an interim title. It would have just been to save the card, basically. But the card was strong enough anyway. I mean, they bumped up Garni versus Lewis, which we'll be talking about in a minute. But as I said jokingly in the week, that card would have been fine if a bus full of fighters got hurt and got taken off the card. Anyway, let's move straight into the recaps then, because that segues in nicely. It would have been an even cleaner segue if I didn't bring up the fact that I was segueing in. Would it be better to do the Ultimate Fighter stuff first? Because I didn't really watch any of that. You guys didn't honestly expect me to sit down and watch Alex Caceres take a split decision over Martin Bravo, did you? I did see Roxanne Modafferi finish Barb Honchak, which was great. I like Roxy. What else happened on that? I just didn't care. Barely watched it. There was too much other good stuff going on. And I'll be honest, I was out getting hammered on Saturday. There was the football, and then there was a party in the evening, and I just got shit-faced. Instituted my one button every 10 minutes at the end of the night on my shirt, which is just how you clear the dance floor. Right, let's talk about... Well, I'll touch on Adesanya versus Tavares, because that was the one that I really paid attention to. Fucking hell, a lot of split decisions on that card, though. And a majority decision. 2 majority decisions. Fucking hell, look at this. Right. 1, 2, 3... 4 split decisions and 2 majority decisions. What is with these judges? Anyway, Israel Adesanya, I thought that was a really good fight for him because Brad Tavares is his first ranked opponent. Brad Tavares, let's just talk about this. The commentator, can't remember if it was Anik or Brendan Thingy or whoever it was, they said, moved from Hawaii to Las Vegas to become a fighter. And trains at Extreme Couture. Is that the most 2009 era bio that you've ever heard for a fighter? Nobody trains... Well, actually, I think Kevin Lee trains at Extreme Couture. But, Extreme Couture has not been seen as, a top camp in quite a while. And moving to Vegas to become a fighter is also a very sort of, pre-2010 storyline. There are top-class gyms all over the place now. You know, you've got TriStar up in Canada, you've got London Shoe Fighters is fairly good over in London, you've got teams in Albuquerque and Florida and all sorts. Hell, there's got to be teams in Hawaii. Penn used to train out there, and Holloway trains there now still, so, you know, you'd be better off just staying in Hawaii now, Brad. But, and that's how the fight played out. Brad Tavares looked like a very 2009 era fighter, particularly on the feet. Israel Adesanya did what he always does. Lots of feinted jabs coming in from low. You know, he carries that lead hand low so that when he shoulder feints, it's a lot more convincing than when the hand's up facing you, or up, like, pointing upright. That shoulder feint and the feinted rear leg kick into, like, a little step forward. Those are two of his slickest moves, and he does them all the time, but they're not going to be the things that, like, you know, kids trying to copy him are going to see. They're going to be trying to do... Well, I mean, having a wicked fast question mark kick is a great thing to do, but those little methods of making the guy react and then making the guy not react and move in quickly, those are the ones that really impress with Adesanya. And then the retreating on, like, 45s we talked about before. Sometimes he does it, like, classically, you know, step back and then step backwards and off to the side, and sometimes he does it step backwards and off to the side while changing stance, which is really clever and smooth. A little bit dangerous, but having sort of a height and reach advantage on his opponents gives him a little bit more buffer zone on that one. But you can do it without a height advantage, but that is a nice little extra thing that he's got, and he keeps the range very well before doing it anyway. And what I like about Adesanya, and he put up a little thing on them, I think it was Twitter, put up a video of him just training, like, circling the ring and stuff, and he tagged me and Lawrence in it, just saying, like, other people wouldn't see the ring craft at work here. But I think what I like about Adesanya is that not only does he keep a very high pace and a high level of activity, and he doesn't hit all the time like he needs to knock the guy out, he just hits like he wants to hurt the guy and pile up the points. But he's the kind of guy who puts time into the boring areas, the less glamorous areas. And while his fighting style is very glamorous for the most part, it's the retreating on 45s, the circling off, all that stuff. And it's the same with, like, if I compared it to BJJ or something like that, or wrestling, it's stripping grips. It's what's his name? It's what Ray F. Carson, the old wrestling coach who wrote a couple of really good books, he used to call it counter control. And that's something I've really been focusing on in recent years. Like, most of fighting is done in taking away your opponent's control, whether that be control of where you are in the cage. You know, if you noticed in this fight, there were very few moments where they were along the cage, and Brad Tavares was having to engage in this striking match in the center, with Israel standing in the center of the cage, as in, like, the center point, not even just, like, out in the open. You know, if you can dictate where the fight happens, and if you can dictate what grips the opponent is allowed, you have a much easier time than trying to react to what your opponent does when he has you along the fence, or when he has his grips set, you know? And it isn't the glamorous stuff, you know, grip breaking is incredibly, not only is it tedious, but it's hard work. So, like, it's a lot easier to just forget about it, let the opponent grab you, and then say, well, if you're grappling this is, and then say, okay, we'll work from there. The tedious stuff is a lot of where Israel Adesanya makes a difference, and a lot of top fighters, you know, make a difference in those small areas of the game which are going to go unnoticed because people are going to be marking out over the back elbow and things like that. Thought he looked fantastic in the clinch. He hit an Osota Gari, like a what is it, greater outside reap, but cross buttock is exactly the same. Tried to hit a couple of Sasai sort of Komiyashis, or little block the foot trips, the kind that you see in Muay Thai all the time. Jab was money, and I think Brad Tavares just, you can't, if the guy is that good at controlling the distance and you haven't moved him towards the fence, you need to work in longer combinations and use feints. You need to, like, jab, fake, double jab, and then get on top of him. You know, you're not going to get him by throwing one jab and then throwing your overhand and trying to bull rush him. Bit rough because Tavares' last fight was a good one for him. That was one of the better fights he's had in a long time. But equally, it shows that there are levels to this shit. And again, no matter what element of the game we're talking about, the guy who controls where you are in the cage controls almost everything. Footwork will always be the best takedown defense for that reason. Anyway, we won't dwell on that too long because I didn't really watch the card too hard. But on to UFC 226, Miocic versus Cormier. What did I watch on this? The girls' fight in the first of the night was Dan Hooker versus Gilbert Burns. I said low-key this might be the most exciting fight for me in the night. And I thought this was really interesting because Dan Hooker is a sort of slower pace, methodical guy. He can knock you out with a punch or a knee, but he has a very comfortable pace. He likes to keep the opponent at range and sort of work things out. He's not a high volume or high pace round kind of guy. Gilbert Burns came out and was looking real. He's black, is he? He was looking real black explosive. No, he was looking really explosive and moving very quickly, and you could see it bothering Hooker to begin with. And then there was sort of that moment where Hooker worked out his timing, and it's always been the case that having someone's timing down is not a case of speed, really. You just have to work out when you need to start moving in their movement, and of course you don't work that out in words in your head. You just get a feel for it. But Hooker was looking slower than him for much of the fight, but he did time him coming in with that. Was it a left straight or a right straight? I can't remember what stance he was in, but just timed him coming in and hit him with a straight punch right on the snout, put him on his ass. The knockout was, and then you saw Hooker putting it together a lot better, controlling the distance much better, and Gilbert Burns slowing down because he came out at such a pace that I was thinking, how is he going to keep that up for 3 rounds? But he couldn't even keep it up for the whole of the first. Jumping back kicks and all that shit, and it looked great, but you were going, okay, what I've learned from this is that you are a great athlete who can copy these moves that he's seen and do that on the pads and stuff, but can you keep it up with a guy moving around and making them fail for however long? And the answer was that he couldn't. Left hook to the body. I mean, Hooker attacked the body a few times in this, which was nice. I think he landed a right straight to the body off a checked low kick, which is one of my favourites. Dudes get really surprised by that because as soon as you check a low kick or take a low kick, they go shit and cover up, expecting you to come back like swinging at their head, but you just look straight at the solar plexus and punch them in it. It's a consistent surprise for people in sparring, which is great fun. But left hook to the body, left hook to the head. Didn't look like that was a big setup by Hooker trying to knock him out. That was just the one that caught him. Hooker's right hand was down by his chest when he did it, and he did get cracked with a simultaneous left hook. It was a real Dan Hardy, Carlos Condit sort of thing. But I think that was good. I thought that was a good performance out of Hooker. It wasn't like his best performance, I'd say, that I've seen lately, because I thought the Chiesa one was a masterpiece. I thought the Ross Pearson one was a masterpiece, but Ross Pearson is very much in the winding down stage of his career. Chiesa is a much more dangerous fighter at this point. But Gilbert Burns, I think, did a good job of flustering him early, but you also got to see Dan Hooker react to that, respond to that, deal with a little bit of early adversity. And it wasn't like, dropped on your ass, struggling to survive early adversity, but it was, this guy's a little bit quicker than me, and I'm struggling to get to these punches or out of the way of these punches in time, and weird kicks. So yeah, I really enjoyed that. Dan Hooker continues to be my boy. Someone tagged me on Reddit in a comment that says, Jack's always saying, never hook with a hooker, hooker capitalized. I was like, oh, that's so clever. I wish I'd thought of that for the podcast. I can't remember who it was, but credit to them. I thought that was fucking hilarious. Millender versus Griffin, that was all right. Close versus Lando Venata. Lando disappoints again, but has an entertaining fight in the process, which is what we said always happens with Lando Venata. He's going to be in the Darren... He's got to win a fight, because he's in the Darren Cruikshank position of being guaranteed good viewing, guaranteed hard fight for anyone, but also not having the numbers to back up what he wants to earn, They cut... Darren Cruikshank was on 20 grand show money, and probably 20 grand win money, and they cut him. So, and he was... if he was on a fight night card, one of these shit fight nights cards, you could have put him in the co-main event. I wouldn't care how many losses he had on his record. I'd just see Darren Cruikshank. Oh, cool, that'll be fun. Looks like they realised that people like Lando, though, because they had him on the early prelims and they bumped him up to the Fox Sports 1 prelims. Further reason to not bother having fight pass. But Lando looked good in the sort of early moments of the fight. He did some nice... it sort of foreshadowed what was to come with a couple of nice punches on the break. He'd hit a little trip or a bump off to the side and then try and chin him on the way out. But Close was doing good work in the clinches. It was the same sort of thing actually that David Tamer did. Just get the head position and hit him with some knees and things like that. And also Lando Venata likes to clinch up off his right hand. He's another fighter who's quite guilty of working at his own pace and taking breaks, and he takes those breaks by weaving into the clinch. And Close would just have the better position every time he came in because he was expecting it. I'm going to rewatch that fight because I sort of bumbled through it. And the same is true of Sunsao versus Rob Font, actually. But I thought Sunsao looked maybe not more... Well, I thought he looked more active, but maybe not more like hyper-aggressive, but he looked like he actually wanted to hurt the guy, and he was hitting him with low kicks and things that looked like they stung. Which is a good thing to do, because, you know, he got his first finish in forever in his last fight. And I was, you know, we were all saying, me and the 5 lads at the Sunsao fan club were saying, you know, if he finishes like another 1 dude or 2 dudes, that's title shot. He's got the resume to back up the title shot already. You just need something that they can actually play on the highlight reel before the fight. You know, he's got nothing on that. His highlight reel consists of the couple of punches he lands around that are quite crafty. I was surprised how small he looked next to Rob Font. But yeah, just another Sunsao performance, really. Just being one of the best in the world at that division. But people watching it and going, is he? There's nothing like astounding about Sunsao. You know, if you watch Israel Adesanya beat up Rob Wilkinson, who's not a good fighter, like he was brought in basically to lose to people. I think he lost both his UFC fights, but you know, you can watch him smash that dude and you go, oh, well, Israel Adesanya, he might be one of the best in the world. Look at that striking, blah, blah, blah. But nobody's going to look at Rafael Sunsao beating actual really badass dudes in conservative decisions and think, get this lad in with TJ Dillashaw again. Paulo Costa versus Uriah Hall. This was tinged with sadness for me, actually, because I thought Uriah Hall looked really good for bits of this fight. Because in the pre-fight thing, I was talking about his jab and how he just pumps it and doesn't really do anything with it, doesn't really understand how to land it. He was fucking Costa's face up with that jab. He was hanging it low, flicking it backhanded, and it looked really nice. It looked like, because his jab always looked like some guy who'd done Chuck Norris kickboxing or whatever it was, who, you know, threw punches out of that stance. This one, he actually looked like he was boxing with his jab, and then he'd spin for shit in between. Didn't need to spin, very hard to spin if the guy's applying pressure really well. That's the downside of the spinning kick game generally, is that it works best as a counter. You know, that's when you're going to surprise people, that's when you know where they're going to be. But if you're consistently under pressure, it's very hard to find time to start the spin. And Costa obviously had him under pressure for a lot of that fight. Lovely body shots from Costa. Lovely punches to the dick. You don't see those very often in MMA. The fact that he got away with a couple of them tells us that body shots are actually catching on in MMA now. Because back in the day, if you hit someone in the cup with a punch, it would be fairly obvious. There'd be no reason for your hands to be below his shoulders. You know, back in Brad Tavares' time, 2009. But yeah, I mean, Costa rallied and battered him, and there was a couple of moments that were the classic Uriah Hall folly, which is, I'm too close to the fence, I haven't realised, oh, my back foot's hit the fence, oh, I'm suddenly in a square stance, better circle out with my hands forward of my chin. You know, look, if you're trapped on the fence and you desperately need to circle out, don't circle out upright with no guard. Either weave your head out as you circle out, or fake one direction and go the other, or keep your hands up because they're going to hit you. And he got chinned with the right hand just the same way he did against Weidman, like in his 3rd fight or whatever it was. And Gasolin did it to him a ton. And it happened against Brunson. It's a real common feature in Hall's game. If you get him to the fence, he will circle out with his chin on a platter for you. Kinda sucks that you got hit in the dick a lot. Costa's a bad dude. Very, very scary. Look forward to his next fight. Actually, do you know what I'm going to say? For the first time ever, probably. I look forward to Uriah Hall's next fight. I thought he looked really good. Khalil Roundtree versus Gokhan Sasaki. This is an interesting one. Good on Khalil Roundtree, because I saw him in the interviews leading up to this, and he looked nervous as fuck. But he did actually look nervous as fuck in his stance as he was moving around. But he had his head in the game. He was doing it all right. He was staying close enough. He was constantly circling. He was southpaw. Saki was orthodox, so he was circling past Saki's leg constantly because he knew that Saki was going to throw the kick. because that's what Saki does. He, especially from open guard, he throws the right high kick, and then as you step in, he'll try and counter you with either a right hook or a right straight, or a left hook or a left straight, something like that. We looked at this in our piece last week. He's doing it a lot more in MMA than he did in kickboxing, but he used to do it in kickboxing a lot too. But he kicks naked, and Roundtree just slams, I think it was a left straight down the centre, decks him. This is something I mentioned in the article, but this is something I mention all the time. Your kickboxing pedigree is literally on paper. It's like Dan Henderson's wrestling pedigree. He used to get taken down all the time by guys like Murillo Ninja Hua, who have no wrestling pedigree and are much smaller than him, because of how he fought. Your accomplishments on paper mean nothing if you don't fight to that caliber in the fight. It's what you did in those fights in the kickboxing ring that was important, not the fact that you won them. To the MMA fan, the fact that you won those fights is what makes you the favourite here in the striking. But if you don't do that shit, then you're going to lose. So yeah, naked kick from too close in, and Khalil, I think Roundtree had already shown him the counter already. I'm gonna have to watch the fight again. I should watch it again because it's only 1 minute 30 long. But that's a good scalp to hang on your belt for Khalil Roundtree, and gets him back online because he had that fight. Was it Ion Cutelaba? Maybe. No, it wasn't Ion Cutelaba. What the fuck am I talking about? He hasn't even fought Ion Cutelaba. Oh, and he lost to Tyson Pedro, of course. But yeah, I mean, Anderson Silva was always on about this guy being great. So good on Khalil Roundtree. Hope to see more of him, and hope he bangs out some more dudes. Anthony Pettis versus Michael Chiesa. Michael Chiesa misses weight, having been on course to miss weight the first time when they were supposed to meet at UFC Cursed by Bus Attack. And he said he was having a very hard weight cut, and then the cuts and stuff, and he got pulled out of it and couldn't complete his weight cut, so that's why they had him off the card. Also the facial lacerations. But came in, or was it 2-3 pounds overweight for this, which isn't a whole heap in the bigger picture of things, but he's already an enormous lightweight, and Pettis isn't a particularly big lightweight, but Pettis managed to get 30% of Chiesa's purse out of it, which is fantastic, and Pettis looked fucking brilliant. Chiesa, as we said, would probably happen. He came out like a house on fire. He wanted to get him down quickly. Pettis looked good in the clinch, surprisingly. I don't know if Chiesa's always been the strongest wrestler. He's more gifted at sort of just scrambling onto dudes' backs or crawling all over them once they're down. But Pettis did well in those clinches. He used my favourite sweep of all time, which is almost getting armbarred, and then coming up and sliding your elbow out. There was a really nice, almost Showtime. There's that Showtime catalogue of techniques, the Showtime knee, the Showtime kick. He did the Showtime back kick he did against Clay Guida. He did something else cool against the fence against Chiesa. It was like a spin into a knee attempt. Gorgeous stuff. Got his confidence back. The difference between Anthony Pettis when he's on the attack and when he's being pushed is night and day. And you saw both sides of it in the fight with Jim Miller. But Jim Miller, that fight was probably the first time I saw classic Pettis coming back. He got his man on the fence and he was kicking the shit out of his body. And Pettis has always been great on the ground. Is he still a blue or purple belt in BJJ? Because he was a blue belt when he subbed Benson Henderson. And we were going, wow, you have very high standards for a purple belt at your gym. But yeah, he's always been very good on his back. Always good at making chaos and attacking the whole time. And he went over the top of Chiesa in this one and ended up triangling him from his back and finishing on the armbar. Absolutely brilliant performance by him. Chiesa says he's going up to welterweight, probably for the best. He's had the Kevin Lee loss, and this one sort of killed his momentum. He's gone from being what we considered a top 10 lightweight to a sort of also ran. Yeah, and he hasn't won a fight since 2016. I mean, that was Beneil Dariush, which is a really good name to have, but especially submitting Beneil Dariush, because Dariush, if you don't know Dariush, he came to prominence in BJJ because he had a match with Kron Gracie back in the day, and just gave him all that he could handle back when everyone was expecting Kron to be the next great thing. Shit, where is Kron Gracie? He should be fighting in MMA at some point. But yeah, I mean, since 2016, and that was April 2016, so he's not done anything in a very long time. Move up to welterweight, sort out your weight cut. He had a back injury. He was supposed to fight Tony Ferguson, I remember. Yeah, that guy needs to, whatever he needs to do, carry around some more weight, not have to cut the huge amount of weight, keep himself healthier. A lot of these guys say that they are, not only are we seeing guys go up in weight And firstly, the old one is guys go up in weight, and rather than struggle, say you're a lightweight, you go up to welterweight, you don't struggle with the welterweight power when guys hit you. You actually seem to take shots better because you're not dehydrating yourself first. Guys seem to drive a better pace and last better over the rounds when they don't cut the weight. I mean, Gasolin versus Whitaker is, people love the Michael Bisping lost to a welterweight argument with Gastelum stuff, but Gastelum and Whitaker are both welterweights who went up to middleweight. Gastelum was forced to. Whitaker went up because he had a rough loss to Wonderboy and decided to try not cutting weight, or not cutting as much weight. Both of them look happy and healthy on the scale. When you see like the guys they're fighting, like Romero or Tim Kennedy or people like that, coming in looking absolutely drained and miserable, and then they outlast them the whole time too. And some people have said like that it's they don't find themselves getting as injured in camp if they're not trying to cut away all the fat on their body. And of course, there's the whole thing that you can take a body shot better if you're not like 2% body fat. So it's interesting. Again, it's like concussions. We will never have all the actual studies on it. It will always be some kind of old wives' tale. But if he can make a change and do decently at welterweight, that would be fantastic. Mike Perry versus Paul Felder. Oh my God, Paul Felder got so badly gypped. Not in terms of the split decision, but in terms of having a fight with James Vick, gangly lightweight, and then ending up in with Mike Perry, ferociously hard-hitting welterweight. This guy just... Stop being a company man. Go into business for yourself, for God's sake. I thought Perry looked good. I thought he looked more varied, more interesting, less sort of stuck in the swing mentality. I thought Felder looked very hittable, like always. Obviously very unlucky that the cut got opened by a headbutt very early on. But, yeah, I mean, it's not going to look bad for Paul Felder. It just sort of fucks with it because he was on such a great streak and now he's got that loss that everyone can see on his record when they're scanning through it. I think you got to thank him by putting him in with like another top 15 lightweight almost immediately. Maybe even a top 10, because like the dude deserves some gratitude for all that he fucking does. Derrick Lewis versus Francis Ngannou. This is the one I really wanted to talk about. I have heard every theory under the sun. Someone was getting really mad because I just couldn't see that this was Francis Ngannou not being happy with his contract and trying to renegotiate by having a boring fight and then threatening to go to Bellator. Firstly, Bellator will hire you regardless of what you fight like, so maybe there's some truth to that. But secondly, Ngannou recently was saying like he's so happy with his contract, he's so grateful. He could never imagine making $500,000 a fight or whatever it was he got to fight Stipe. He has been given everything on a platter. He's been matched up against easily knockoutable people, Andrei Arlovski and Alistair Overeem back to back. He is one of the most overhyped fighters of all time. He's not a bad fighter, but he's so badly overhyped. And he just came off a loss where punching as hard as he could in the first round left him helpless for 4.5 rounds. So it's quite understandable that he would just be a little bit gun-shy. Firstly, because Lewis talked big game. You never ever want to lose to someone who's talked that much. But secondly, because Lewis is genuinely dangerous if he gets on top of you, and can take a terrific shot and give a terrific shot, even though he very rarely lands good punches. I can totally see Francis. Well, what he said afterwards was that he was scared, and I could totally see him doing that. People try and ascribe too much meaning to shit performances. It's like when Anderson Silva came out against Damian Maia and kicked his ankles for 5 rounds at an incredibly low pace, landed like 2 jabs to the head. Fortunately broke Maia's nose, which people could then spin into like, yeah, he could have killed him any time he wanted. But went 5 rounds not doing anything particularly special. 60 strikes landed over 25 minutes, which is pretty janky for even Anderson Silva like level of activity. And then afterwards he was like, well, he said something in the pre-fight interviews that I didn't like, so I wanted to punish him by not knocking him out and letting him go the distance while really only getting kicked in the leg. Sometimes guys just have bad fights because they match up badly or because they're in a bad mental place. It happens. However, Derrick Lewis did just outstrike the hardest puncher in the universe, so give him a fucking title shot is what I say. Or him versus Lesnar to decide who deserves the title least. And then Daniel Cormier versus Stipe Miocic. Obviously our focus today because It was terrific. I wrote an article called How Daniel Cormier Killed the King. I'm doing GIFs with annotations on now. They take quite a while to do, but they are very much worth it. It means that I can demonstrate stuff like Cormier using that weird mummy guard, dabbing on the haters. Basically, when he thinks his man's going to throw a right hand, he throws his left arm straight out over their right shoulder, like out at an angle. So not towards their face in a jab, but over their shoulder. And the arm bars their right hand. That's like, back in bare-knuckle times, that was the go-to defense for the right hand, because the right hand was usually an overhand swing. But Edwin Hazlett called it a leverage guard. Basically, you're muffling their arm like at the bicep and elbow with your forearm and elbow. And your shoulders raised up so that it's hiding your chin. And DC, you know, if you tuck your chin into your shoulder, you'll be in good position. But DC's head was like down way out by his side with his chin up in the air, doing the dab. But what it does do is that if they keep moving in, which they probably will because they're throwing a hard punch and DC's moving in too, what he can do is throw his arm over their back. And what most fighters will do, if you do that, if you're not Daniel Cormier Olympian, if you're just a normal dude, they'll instantly grab the body lock. And that's what Stipe Miocic did, and that's what Volkan Ozdemir did at points in their fights, even though they were consciously trying not to. If they grab the body lock, that's when Cormier, he'll grab the headlock and encourage them to grab the body lock, or he'll reach around and take the overhook, or he'll, when he got pushed to the fence actually he did it out in the open too, but he'll push the head away and bring his underhook back through elbow first and take the underhook. And he was looking for that throughout the fight. And then the other way was that if Miocic backed up as he threw his arm over his back, Miocic would get into position with his head in front of Cormier's, his forearm in front of Cormier's neck, and his hips back so that Cormier couldn't suck him in, clinch. Problem is, if you try and leave the clinching range like that, you are completely open to the uppercut, and Cormier's hand is already over your back, so it just slides into position on that collar tie. And it was that uppercut that he was throwing against John Jones and Alexander Gustafsson. He fell in love with it, but he didn't really have any very clever setups for it. But by looking for this like headlock clinch, and then if the guy backs away, catching it on the way out, he's found a really clever way to set it up. He did it against Ozdemir too. It's very, very clever. And there was all the checking with the hands and shooting the jab. He out-jabbed the best jabber in the division by having his hands out straight in front of him on Stipe's hands, occupying the line. You watch George Foreman versus Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali doesn't land a single good jab until late in that fight, when George Foreman's sort of staring at him along the ropes or pushing him away and trying to get some space to hit. Muhammad Ali could not jab George Foreman because George Foreman's hands were in the way of his jab. If you watch Muhammad Ali versus Ken Norton did not give a shit if Muhammad Ali threw a left hook. He just had his right hand in the path of Muhammad Ali's jab at all points. If you put your palm in between your opponent's guard where their fist is and your face on the straightest line, they can't jab through your palm unless you're really weak and stupid. The thing is that you sacrifice defenses on other angles and other lines. People overcomplicate things. It's if you are a very scientific striker and you work entirely in straight punches, putting your hands, or the opponent putting their hands in front of yours will be really annoying. So what would happen is Stipe would try and pull his hands back into himself, and as soon as his hands moved back in, Cormier would jab him in the eye. And they were good punches too. They swelled him up something nice. And you saw a couple of chances where he went for the right hand on the break as Stipe threw his hips back and kept his head forward. The last exchange started with Stipe Miocic throwing his right hand, getting too excited and throwing it again, in quick succession. Showing that massive Stipe flaw of hands low, chest out, hands down by your waist, face forward, throwing the right hand, leaning forward with no intention to get back to your guard at all, just hunting for the other guy's head. And Cormier cracked him with a 1-2 off that. They went into the clinch. Cormier brought his elbow back through, caught the underhook as he'd been looking to do all fight, and as Miocic backed out of the clinch, he just clipped him across the chin with his short right hand. And those ones are the crazy ones. I was talking about Henry Armstrong. We talked about him in the Barney Ross episode. He used to call his right hand the blackout because it travelled about 6 inches because he was always up straight on someone. I literally just put my shoulder in the chest of the microphone here. But he'd put his shoulder in the chest and he'd be digging these short piston punches to the solar plexus. and then as soon as he had space, or if he bumped them with the shoulder, he'd just bring this 6-inch right hand across. And, sometimes it'd do nothing. And sometimes it would shake the guy to his boots and he wouldn't recover for the whole fight. And in round 4 against Barney Ross, suddenly he just cracks him and Ross's legs go and he's done for the rest of the fight. It's just one-way traffic and Henry Armstrong beats the shit out of him. Those short sneakers, people saying well, I've always suspected Stipe's chin was shit. It tells you something when you get put down by a punch like that. And you're like, well, no, because he took big swings from Ngannou. There was an uppercut in the first round that came from Africa and hit Stipe right in the eye, and he was fine as he ducked onto it. It's the ones that catch you when you're not ready for them that are always going to do the damage. I can't believe this is still a thing, that people believe that it's how hard the punch is and not how ready your brain is and how ready your jaw is for the connection. But yeah, an amazing feel-good win for Daniel Cormier. Wins both belts, has stupid interaction with Brock Lesnar, but if you didn't know, Daniel Cormier is a huge wrestling mark. There's a great video of him marking out when Seth Rollins cashed in the Money in the Bank to take the title from the big dog, Roman Reigns. But also, during the UFC 200 press stuff, Daniel Cormier and Brock Lesnar were thick as thieves. They absolutely loved each other. Daniel Cormier was just losing his shit while these cretinous press members were saying, Brock, how many rounds did you get in for this fight? And Brock Lesnar's 1,000. And Daniel Cormier's just losing his shit in the corner. But, they make their fights. It's easy money for Cormier. It's easy money for Endeavour. I suppose there isn't a clear top contender. Most of us would want to see Volkov, I suppose. Because a win over Verdum is a really good thing to have in the heavyweight division. Nobody wants to see Derek Lewis, but Daniel Cormier would murder Derek Lewis. I don't make bold predictions, but what does Lewis have that Daniel Cormier can't just ragdoll him to the floor and beat him up? And Daniel Cormier has cardio, so that's trump card number 1, especially at heavyweight. You can't make the Garni fight because Garni just lost the fight he was supposed to win in the most unimpressive fashion possible. Curtis Blades maybe, but then you just got a young wrestler versus an older, better wrestler, and the young wrestler has no striking while the older, better wrestler has weird looking but very much serviceable striking and knockout power. So that division's a shithole. It's interesting seeing how people have reacted to this, because there's been a lot of talk of considering Daniel Cormier one of the best of all time. He's always adamant that Cain Velasquez is the better fighter out of the two of them, but he's pretty humble dude. And Cain isn't there, and Cain isn't doing it. And to be fair, the whole thing used to be that Cain could strike and Daniel Cormier couldn't. Cormier's striking, while it is weird, has definitely become its own thing. He has learned his whole new system of striking. Cain Velasquez is just a 1-2 and a low kick. But he did wheel kick a guy once, and that will make people think that you're the greatest striker in heavyweight history. But Daniel Cormier already defended his title against basically anyone who matters at light heavyweight. Someone was saying if he beats Gustafsson and Lesnar, that will have secured it. And I was just so many people are talking about this Lesnar fight like it's something that has to happen now. Lesnar, who came back and positively surprised by beating Mark Hunt with no training, but Mark Hunt was only a top heavyweight for a very brief period of time, Brock failed his drug test, even while they were giving him every possible favour so that he wouldn't fail his drug test. That is not in any way a fight that needs to happen. That's a fight that allows Daniel Cormier to walk away with an extra $1 million or whatever. And then the other one was Gustafsson, and Gustafsson, his greatest trick has been never fighting, so that he's never more than 2 fights away from almost beating Daniel Cormier and John Jones, because those guys have both fought half a dozen times since then. But Alexander Gustafsson can always say, well, 2 fights ago, I almost beat this guy. Alexander Gustafsson can just not talk until he's actually put 2 fights together in the same year, is, I think, the rule now. I think that's a fair thing to say. Anyway, I had planned to do some questions today, but fucking hell, we ran over just talking about this stuff. There's also an event on this. Well, there's several events on. It's Bellator International Fight Week, which means Julia Budd's in action. Fuck yeah! Get to find out what the number 4 featherweight in the division is up to. But you've also got Dos Santos fighting Ivanov, who is a dark horse, and some other not as interesting fights on that card. So maybe we can do a second. I'd like to do a second podcast this week. Still working on some K1 stuff for the history episodes, and well into my research on the Boxer Rebellion because people actually said they'd love it, so we're going to do that. Being me, I went straight back to the Opium Wars, and I was like, yeah, East India Company, yeah, rah. So yeah, if you want to get in on the Patreon episodes and support the podcast and, just help me do the things I love, that would be awesome. So sign up to Patreon for that. If you want to send your emails to the podcast, I have 4 to answer now next week that I'd set up to answer in the previous 2 weeks. But I would love to hear from you. And if you have any questions about, pound for pound or some shit like that, send that to fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com. Everything I do is up on thefightprimer.com. And if you haven't read the last 2 articles on the DC Miocic stuff and the one on Gokhan Saki, go read them. I put in some cool new GIF stuff. I'm running the game again, is what I'm saying. And I will catch you next week. Connor bless.